I always thought loyalty was currency. Not stock options, not bonuses, not the glittering nonsense that came and went with each fiscal year. Real loyalty. The kind you prove by showing up every morning for 4 decades, steady as the sunrise, watching empires rise and fall inside the same gray walls. That belief kept me in place when others chased startups and hollow promises. It made me the quiet spine of the company, the one who remembered how things worked before they forgot what work even meant. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 61 years old. Until recently, I was Senior Operations Director at Harrington Systems, a logistics firm that prided itself on calling itself a family. That word, family, was printed on the brochures, painted in the lobby, muttered in every town hall address. I believed it once, believed it with the same faith men carry into war or church. 40 years is a long time to carry anything. That morning, the boardroom felt colder than usual, though the thermostat read the same. Fluorescent light hummed overhead, steady and merciless. The CEO, Victor Hale, leaned back in his Italian leather chair, hands folded like a man rehearsing a eulogy he didn't really want to give. His cufflinks caught the light. Polished gold, initials engraved. A small indulgence he wore as if to remind us he was worth more than the rest of us combined. He smiled before he spoke, which is how I knew it would be bad. Then the words came, smooth as silk and sharp as glass. Maybe it's time to retire, Daniel. I didn't move. 40 years of habit held me still. My fingers rested against the notepad I'd brought, knuckles pale, but I didn't grip it. I studied his expression like a chess player, analyzing a bluff. He was calm, too calm, as if the decision had been made long ago, and today was only ceremony. Around the table, the board members avoided my eyes, shifting papers they didn't need to shift, clearing throats already clear. No one wanted to meet the gaze of the man being buried alive. I could have spoken then, could have reminded them of the contracts I salvaged, the crises I steered us through, the nights I spent sleeping in the office while others were at home with their families. But Victor didn't want reasons. He wanted compliance. So I let the silence stretch, long enough to make him uncomfortable. And then I nodded, as if he'd merely suggested a different lunch order. That's when the door opened and she walked in. 25, maybe, blonde highlights catching the overhead glow, phone in her hand like it was an extension of her body. She chewed gum openly, jaws clicking, eyes flicking around the room with the impatience of someone dragged into a meeting that wasn't hers. A name was offered, Claire, but it hardly mattered. Victor gestured toward me, with the air of a king passing down a sword. Claire will be taking over aspects of your portfolio. We're very excited to bring in fresh energy, new thinking. She represents the future of Harrington Systems. She sat without waiting to be invited, crossed her legs, and asked, "Do we still do pensions here?" My dad said I should ask about that. Laughter rippled around the table, awkward and thin. My jaw tightened, but I forced a smile. Pensions, the very foundation I had fought to preserve for decades, the security promised to men and women who had given their lives to this company. She asked about it the way someone asks if the coffee machine still works. I studied her. No notes, no files, no preparation. Just bright confidence and an assumption that the world would catch her if she stumbled. I thought of the people who'd trained under me, the veterans who built their lives on the certainty that Harrington meant stability. And now, here was the future. Gum-snapping, half-distracted, and completely unworthy of the seat she occupied. Victor leaned forward, steepling his hands. "Daniel, you've given us more than we can ever repay. Truly. But times are changing. You deserve rest, travel, family, a chance to enjoy the fruits of all those years. It was a dagger wrapped in velvet. I heard what he didn't say. You're obsolete. You're in the way. I glanced at the others. Finance director scribbling nothing on a pad, HR chief staring at her nails, operations VP adjusting his tie as if it might strangle him. No allies, no defenders, just witnesses pretending blindness. I set my pen down, folded my hands, and offered a thin smile. I wish you luck. The room exhaled, relieved I hadn't fought. Claire popped her gum and smirked, already spinning her chair to face Victor. The decision was sealed. My legacy, dismissed with one sentence, and a replacement who didn't know what she was inheriting. I rose slowly, buttoned my jacket, and pushed back my chair with deliberate calm. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't give them the satisfaction of anger. I walked out with the same steady steps I had taken into this building every day for 40 years. But beneath that practiced composure, something colder stirred. Because I knew what they didn't. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The first morning after I walked out of Harrington Systems, I tried to believe I was free. No alarm clock, no tie biting into my neck, no endless traffic crawling toward a glass tower that swallowed daylight whole. I made coffee in silence and sat on the back porch, the newspaper folded on my lap. For a moment, the illusion almost worked. Birds cut across the sky. The neighbor's dog barked at a passing truck. The world carried on as though nothing had been taken from me. But beneath the quiet surface, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped me out and left only the shape of a man behind. I told myself I would fill that emptiness with something useful. I planted tomatoes in the small patch of dirt behind the garage, bought myself a fishing rod I hadn't touched in decades, even tried jogging in the evenings like I'd seen the younger men at the office brag about. But every new routine carried the aftertaste of failure. My hands in the soil felt restless, not calm. The fishing line hummed in the wind, but I saw only the boardroom table, Victor Hale's gold cufflinks flashing as he leaned forward with that false smile. Even on the jogging path, surrounded by strangers, I could hear Claire's gum snapping in my head, each pop like a match struck against memory. At night, I lay awake replaying it all, the words hitting harder in the dark. Maybe it's time to retire, Daniel. The way he said it, as if he were doing me a kindness, was worse than a direct order. And that girl's careless question about pensions. She hadn't earned the right to mock what generations had bled years into. That boardroom had been my battlefield, and I had fought in it for 40 years. Yet they handed it to her as though I were just a placeholder finally erased. I thought walking away meant the chapter was closed, but my mind refused the ending. I began watching them from the edges, as though I could still see the pulse of the company if I looked hard enough. I pulled up quarterly reports online, scanned for familiar patterns, compared them to the numbers I knew by heart. I checked their LinkedIn page, scrolling through announcements dressed up as triumphs. Promotions, new initiatives, fresh perspectives. I memorized every word, not because I cared to celebrate them, but because I was looking for cracks in the paint. Some nights, when the rest of the neighborhood settled into sleep, I drove past the headquarters. I didn't stop, didn't park, just slowed enough to study the lit windows. I could tell by the glow which departments were working late, which floors were empty shells. Once, I saw Claire's silhouette pacing in the conference room. Even from the street, even through the glass, I could read her body language. Fidgety, uncertain, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. She wasn't built for this. She had no armor, no history. The early signs of rot came quickly. I heard whispers through old contacts still inside. Missed deadlines, clients growing impatient, entire projects stalling because no one knew the systems I'd designed. Claire's innovations sounded good in theory, but good theory doesn't ship products. It doesn't calm investors or close deals. Numbers dipped, complaints rose. The company's once steady reputation began to stutter. I didn't move to fix any of it. That was the strangest part. For 40 years, my instinct had been to solve, to patch holes before they sank us. But now, I watched with the patience of a man who had learned to listen for silence in a room full of lies. Each stumble, each small failure was a melody to me. They thought they'd buried me. In truth, I was still there, circling, waiting, savoring the slow decay. During the day, I played the role of the retired man. I mowed the lawn, waved at neighbors, read books I couldn't finish. To them, I was adjusting, finding my new rhythm. But inside, my pulse beat to a different cadence. I tracked the company like a hunter, following a wounded animal, measuring its stagger, noting where it bled. I knew what was coming. They didn't. And I would be ready to watch when the weight of their own arrogance finally crushed them. I wasn't done, not even close. The first whispers about Claire came less than 2 months after I left. A client I'd worked with for nearly 20 years reached out, not to check on me, but to vent. He said she'd shown up to a meeting with a deck full of flashy graphics and empty phrases. Synergy, market disruption, next-gen solutions. He said she talked for 40 minutes, without once answering his actual question. He used a word I'd never heard him use before. Amateur. That word clung to me like smoke. I didn't repeat it to anyone, but I turned it over in my mind until it became a small, private victory. More stories followed, quiet at first, then louder. An old colleague called after hours, whispering into the phone like he was confessing a crime. Claire had mocked the systems I built in front of the entire department, sneering at the antiquated spreadsheets and old-school redundancies that had held Harrington together for decades. Yet later, he caught her poring over the archived documents I'd left behind, copying language, diagrams, and flowcharts almost word for word. She wanted the results of my work without admitting she needed it. She was an actress wearing clothes tailored by someone else, pretending they were her own. I didn't smile often in those days, but that night I did. Not the kind of smile you give a friend or a stranger, but the kind that tightens without warmth, sharp around the edges. A smile that belongs to a man who knows time is already on his side. I started gathering what I needed. Years of emails saved in private drives, contracts I'd fought to secure, receipts that showed my fingerprints on every major milestone the company had ever celebrated. Harrington Systems had tried to erase me, but I had kept my own ledger, every number and name cataloged in places they would never think to look. I dusted off hard drives and file boxes like an old soldier oiling his weapons. Patience was my blade now, silence my scope. Slowly, I reached out to those who still remembered, men and women with silver in their hair and scars of their own, people who had been shuffled into corners while Claire was paraded around as the future. They didn't need persuasion. Betrayal leaves its mark quickly, and they carried the same burn I did. They told me what I already suspected. Her arrogance was grating, her competence shallow, her leadership a mask slipping more each day. She could bluff the young and the desperate, but those who'd built their lives in those walls could see the cracks widening. Then came the news that sharpened everything. Harrington had landed a contract worth millions, the kind of deal that determined reputations and balance sheets for years. And Victor, blinded by his obsession with fresh energy, had put Claire in charge of it. The project wasn't just important, it was survival. If she delivered, she'd be untouchable. If she failed, the company would bleed. I sat with that knowledge in silence, the way I used to sit in foxholes during storms, waiting for the rain to thin before moving. Survival, I'd learned long ago, isn't strength or speed. It's patience. It's letting others believe you've disappeared while you count their footsteps, measure their mistakes, and wait for the exact moment the ground gives way beneath them. Claire didn't even know she was already in the trap. She thought her buzzwords were weapons, her youth a shield. She thought old men like me faded away quietly. She had no idea I was still watching, still listening, still sharpening every piece of evidence I'd hoarded. Every call from a colleague, every rumor of a botched meeting, every complaint from a client was another crack in the facade she built out of borrowed pieces. And I let it stand, let her parade it like a fortress, because I knew what happened when the first real test came. Walls built on someone else's foundation don't hold, and when they fall, they don't just crumble. They collapse in silence first, and then, all at once. It was a Tuesday evening when the call came in. An old colleague, his voice tight with disbelief, told me Claire was set to present the flagship project to the board. Not just any project. My project. The one I had built piece by piece over years of late nights and near breakdowns. The one that kept Harrington Systems profitable when others stumbled. She had stripped it down, rebranded it as her own, and dressed it in bright, meaningless language. The board believed it. Victor believed it. They were prepared to hand her the crown with applause. I sat alone in my study after the call, the blinds drawn, the desk lamp throwing a thin circle of light across piles of my records. The temptation to act was immediate, fierce. I could send an email to the board with every time-stamped file, every signed contract, every shred of proof that what she planned to present had been lifted wholesale from my work. I could end her tomorrow with a single keystroke. But I didn't move. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and let the thought pass. Because there was something sweeter in waiting. I'd spent years cleaning up messes for Harrington, putting out fires started by careless executives or reckless decisions. I'd been the man who stayed after midnight to patch the holes no one else noticed, who pulled dying projects out of the mud and made them walk again. That was my legacy, though they never put it on a plaque. I was the man who saved them. But saving them had earned me nothing in the end. So why save them now? The question gnawed at me. Nights stretched longer. I took to walking before dawn, tracing quiet streets while the world still slept. The debate played in my head with every step. Was it justice to expose her before she failed? Or was justice letting the fire burn unchecked? Each time, I came back to the same answer. Silence. Silence was sharper than any argument, heavier than any proof. If they wanted to believe she could do what I had done, then let them. Let them all stand on the edge of the cliff, smiling, and step forward together. War has many forms. In my world, it wasn't bullets or trenches, but deadlines and contracts. Crises that threatened livelihoods instead of lives. I remembered one winter years ago when a system failure left us hours from losing a government contract worth tens of millions. Everyone panicked. Phones rang without answers. Leadership froze. I was the one who stepped in, pulled an exhausted team into a room, and rebuilt the plan under crushing pressure. We delivered at the last possible moment. Harrington cheered me as a hero. The company survived, but the memory left a bitter taste now, because heroes are forgotten once the dust settles. This time, I chose not to be the hero. I chose to be the ghost. The whispers inside the company grew louder with each passing week. Investors were restless, clients wary. Delays spread like cracks in glass. Teams shuffled from one crisis to another, burning themselves out while Claire talked about agility and paradigm shifts. The board remained blind, lulled by Victor's promises and Claire's glossy charts. They mistook motion for progress. And I watched. I read every article that mentioned Harrington, dissected every financial update. Their numbers didn't add up, but no one outside seemed willing to say it yet. Layoffs were rumored. Morale inside the office was brittle, and people who once defended the company now spoke of leaving. The air around Harrington was heavy with the scent of something dying, though no one could name it out loud. Sometimes I drove past headquarters at night. I'd park 2 blocks away and watch the building's glowing windows. I imagined the tension inside, the late-night calls, the frantic attempts to polish Claire's crumbling plan into something that looked stable. From the street, the glass tower looked as cold as it had the first day I walked in as a young man. But now, I could almost hear it groan under the weight of its own arrogance. Each day I did nothing. My silence tightened like a noose around their necks. Claire was preparing to step in front of the board with a plan destined to collapse under scrutiny. Victor would defend her, because admitting the truth would mean admitting he had been blind. The board would watch, forced to see the rot they had ignored. All I had to do was wait. Waiting was its own discipline. It was the patience of a hunter who has already chosen the kill, but lets the prey wander a little farther into the open. It was the control of a soldier holding fire until the target is clear. My entire career had taught me this skill, though I never thought it would be turned on the very people I had once protected. And so I sharpened my silence, day by day. I let them walk closer to the edge, because I knew when the ground gave way, it wouldn't just be Claire who fell. It would be everyone who believed in her. The boardroom was full before she even arrived. I knew it would be. Investors, directors, senior staff, faces gathered like a jury waiting for a verdict. The table gleamed under recessed lights, polished to a false perfection. Victor sat at the head, his gold cufflinks shining, as though they could anchor the illusion of control. He smiled too easily, nodding to whispers, projecting confidence. But I'd seen that smile before, and I knew it was only skin stretched over fear. Claire swept in late, wearing a blazer a size too sharp for her frame, hair styled in a way that screamed effort. She carried a laptop under her arm, like a weapon she hadn't yet learned to fire. Gum clicked once between her teeth before she caught herself and tucked it into her cheek. The room quieted. Victor gestured to her as if presenting royalty, his voice dripping with pride. Claire will walk us through the future of Harrington Systems. She opened her slides. The first few came easy. Bright colors, modern fonts, words like optimization and scalability splashed across the screen. She moved quickly, her voice riding a practiced rhythm. Heads nodded around the table, not in understanding, but in the kind of shallow agreement people offer when they don't want to appear lost. I had seen that trick 1,000 times, but the longer she spoke, the thinner her confidence became. Data appeared, numbers that bent under the slightest weight, projections that stretched reality like taffy. One director leaned forward, frowning. Another whispered to the man beside him. Victor's smile tightened. She pressed on, moving faster, but speed couldn't disguise the cracks forming in her story. Then came the questions. Can you show us how these figures align with last quarter's results? What's your plan for mitigating client churn? These numbers, where did they originate? They don't match what we've seen internally." Her face flushed. She scrolled through slides with trembling fingers, searching for answers that weren't there. Words spilled from her mouth, buzzwords strung together like beads on a wire. No substance, no structure, just noise. Investors exchanged looks. Victor shifted in his seat, tugging at his cuffs as if the gold might give him strength. That was the moment I had been waiting for. From a quiet corner of the digital world, the package I'd prepared weeks earlier deployed. Files fed directly into the inboxes of every board member, every investor, every senior staffer in the room. Proof layered on proof. Her uncorrected errors, client complaints forwarded without action, contradictions between her words and the company's own records. Screens lit up across the table as the evidence landed, one by one, a silent cascade of truth. The room froze. No one spoke at first, just the rustle of pages printed too late, the glow of tablets and phones revealing exactly what she had tried to bury. Claire stood at the front, blinking into the silence, her voice faltering as she realized the ground had vanished beneath her. She stammered, tried to explain, but the weight of evidence was absolute. The silence wasn't mercy. It was the sound of a verdict being written in real time. Victor finally spoke, but his voice had lost its polish. "Claire, do you have an explanation?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The gum clicked once, loud as a gunshot. A laugh might have saved her, a tear might have bought sympathy, but she had neither. Only panic. Her arrogance had evaporated, leaving nothing but a hollow outline. The humiliation was complete before Victor even dismissed her, but he had no choice. The board stared at him, their trust eroding by the second. Investors were already withdrawing, whispers thick with the word liability. He cleared his throat, face pale. "Claire, we'll have to terminate your contract immediately." The words cut her down with finality. Years of arrogance collapsed in a single breath. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I simply watched in my mind's eye, clinical as a sniper confirming the shot. The work was finished. There would be no sequel, no shadow left to rise again. She was destroyed, and with her went the illusion that Victor's fresh ideas could replace the foundation I had built. When I stepped outside into the afternoon air, it felt like the first true breath I had taken since leaving. Sunlight touched my face, sharp and warm, and the city hummed around me as if it hadn't just witnessed the quiet fall of an empire. I walked without rush, letting the noise of traffic and footsteps blend into something almost peaceful. Betrayal is timeless. It wears many masks, speaks in many voices, but the shape of it never changes. Revenge, too, is older than any company or war. It is not modern, not ancient. It is simply human. People forget that loyalty, once broken, doesn't disappear. It sharpens, it waits, and when the time comes, it strikes with precision. They thought they could erase me. Instead, I erased the idea that I was ever replaceable.